Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another of our Hands with Maxon Beginner Cinema 4D workshops. And as always, I'm here with Matt. How are you doing today, Matt?
Hello, I'm all right, thank you. It seems that our luck is broken. It's bright, but it's not sunny today. Not where I am anyway. I've got grey clouds and rain.
It's
So
not too bad. You know, I have blue sky, but I can't say it's warm,
no,
unfortunately.
it's definitely not warm. It would. I imagine that my weather is very similar to Jay in Newcastle. Thanks for joining us, Jay. Hello.
Cool. Just a quick check. Can you see my screen?
We can. Well, I can, which is all
Cool.
that's important.
Exactly. So, so apparently we don't have audio. I'm hoping everyone else can hear me just fine.
I can hear you. You can hear
Okay,
me. I'm
okay,
assuming Jay can hear us because he's just mentioned the weather. So.
cool. Well, yeah, let us know if you are having. Okay, Rick's saying seeing and hearing well, so that's good. Cool. Right. So, hey to everyone who's been here before, and anyone who's joining us for the first time. The idea of these sessions, if you don't know, is to get you guys comfortable in Cinema 4D in as little as 6 weeks. So we break this down um, through 6 different kind of major topics. And so far, we've gone through the first 4 weeks, and I cannot believe how quickly this is all going. It's going
I
so
know.
fast. And it's crazy, isn't it? So week 1, we did like a getting started. Week 2, we did modeling. Week 3, lighting and materials, and week 4, animation dynamics. And in case you don't know, we actually have our own YouTube channel, which is our Maxon Training Team YouTube. And all of these sessions, as well as pretty much everything else that we do, is all recorded. So if you go onto our YouTube and scroll all the way down, you can find Hands On with Maxon. And then here are all of the recordings to our previous sessions. And the next kind of like two are going to be on there as well.
Only two. Today's and next
I know.
week's.
Do you know what? I saw these 3 and apparently ignored this one as I was looking at it. Cool. Yeah. So as Matt was saying, week 5. So we're on the 5th week, which is all things to do with MoGraph. And then next week we're going to be looking at some, fun rendering stuff. So MoGraph. So what we're going to be looking at today. So the main kind of objectives of the next 2 hours is to understand the MoGraph workflow and kind of how it works. Because as you guys know, we have like a bit of a hierarchy system in our objects manager to make things work together. And the MoGraph is no different. We have a certain order in which things have to happen to make them work. We're also going to learn how to use the cloner, which is pretty much one of the most powerful tools, not just in MoGraph, but inside of Cinema 4D and its kind of multiple different possibilities. We're going to learn what effectors are, how we can use them within our different setups, and develop an understanding of fields. And when we say like an understanding, it's because fields can be used pretty much anywhere inside of Cinema 4D. So we've had a look at them a little bit with Vertex maps that we touched on last week, and then also inside of deformers. But we can use them, in dynamics, we can use them in MoGraph, which we'll look at today, and kind of across a bunch of other different tools inside of Cinema 4D. And then finally, we're going to understand how to use the Voronoi Fracture. So Matt had a little look at this last week when we were kind of messing with some cool dynamics, and we had a few questions on it, but we thought we'd save those questions for today's kind of session when we're going to be going through the Voronoi Fracture in a load more detail. And then, as you know, the second half, we're going to be doing a bit of a practical. And so we're going to create a variety of MoGraph scenes. So we've planned 3. We'll see what we get to. But, as always, the project files are also on there for you for all of the scenes. So let's get started. Let's get into it. Matt, did you want to kind of steal the screen from me, or should I
I
chuck it
shall
over?
steal it. Yeah.
And good morning to Pamela. Hey to Jay. Hey to Adonis, to Rick, everyone who's joining us. It's lovely to see you all.
Yeah.
And, as always, ask us your questions. Let us know how you are. Let us know where you're from. And then we'll give you a little shout out.
Yep. And you can see my screen, I'm hoping.
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Cool. So let's have a nosy then. So we're looking at the MoGraph workflow. Um, but I am weirdly going to start a little bit later than that. I'm going to look at the cloner to start with, because I think it's a really useful thing to start with, and then everything builds on top of it because it makes a lot more sense. So the cloner is here. Funnily enough, it's the little white cube with dots on it. So there is the clone. You can see it's cloning, or rather not cloning, because it needs something to clone. So let's give it something to clone, and I'm going to make it clone a sphere. And then I'm going to put the sphere in the cloner by clicking and dragging to making sure the little arrow is down, and pop, there we go. I have some clone spheres. Now, my cloner has a lot of different types of things that you can do with it, and we're going to have a look at some of those now. So with my cloner selected, you can see I'm looking at my objects tab, and I've got got a lot of settings that I can look at. The first one is the mode that it is being created on, and this is a grid. So funnily enough, it creates a grid. Now this grid is currently 3 by 1 by 3. Okay, but I can increase that if I want to 3 by 3 by 3, or if I want to go crazy, I can go 10 by 10 by 10. Oops, just tab between them, press H, and I can see a large mass of spheres. Okay, so relatively simple. Sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought. Something pinged. I don't know if it was GoToMeeting or not for the GoToWebinar. Sorry. So as standard, we just have a cube of 10 by 10 by 10. Okay, made up of all of the spheres. Now, it can work in several different ways as well. So I can change my cube's number this way, or I can also, there are orange dots in the corners, which I should be able to click and drag. Those corners, right, the far corners. Oops, no, I don't want to copy and drag the entire thing. See, there we go. So in the two opposite corners, I can click and drag this, so I can be a bit more organic. If I just want to go, make it this big or make it this small, then I can just do that with those. Now, there are other orange dots as well, and these are very similar positions to back, front, and side. And I can stretch these out, and I can increase and decrease the size of this cube. Now, what this is changing is my end point. So I can define the size that I want my clones. This is the size that I want my cloner, and then increase and decrease the number of clones within that, and you can see that the cube stays the same size. Or I can do per step, and every time I increase the number, it adds that distance between one end and the other. So you can easily set endpoint, or you can set per step. You can also change the form of cubic, spherical, cylindrical. Object we'll come to in a minute. And that's the cloner in like a really simple grid array. I can also choose linear, which is just simply a line of clones. And I can whack up the number of lines of clones, and that will just keep going. Whee! Okay, really quite simple to kind of work with. Just going to move that over a bit. And you can choose the distance that it goes, whether or not it goes in different directions. You can control the movement per individual step, again, like that. So each clone is going to move in this direction each time. You can even control scale percentages. So I can go 90%, so each one will get smaller and smaller, and then it will reverse. So technically it becomes inverted, and then it goes back the other way. I can also do rotation as well, but very little point to show that on a sphere. Okay, so that is the linear mode. I've got a radial array if I want to, which basically gives me a circle. And I can choose the start angle and start the end, choose the end angle. I can do offsets as well, going around in circles. I can do, if I've got an offset, then I can choose a variation, and I can choose more of a random distribution of those clones around the circle. There's quite a lot that you can sit and play with, which is quite nice. And you can choose different orientations for the plane as well. You've got a honeycomb array, which is, funnily enough, really useful for making honeycombs, or block paving, depending on what the sort of thing it is that you're after. So you can do things like that. And again, you can, ooh, didn't mean to do that at all. You can change the plane that is orientated on as well. And again, very simply, you can grab the corners to increase and decrease the clones that way, or you can choose specific numbers here. And again, you can expand them out or squish them together. Okay, so that is the cloner in those sorts of modes at this point. The last one, which I'm going to show you, which I really like, is object. See, it's fascinating, isn't it? I love this one. What that does, that says I will clone this object onto another object. So thusly, I need another object. So let's get another sphere and let's add a couple of zeros to the radius of this sphere. Boom, big sphere. So with my cloner selected on object mode, it says object, choose your object. And now I can either click and drag, or I can use that and then pick the object that I want to do. So now I have a sphere with tiny spheres on it. And at the moment that's just done by count, so I can whack that up to 100, and 100 is just as high as the slider goes. If I click in the virtual slider here, I can just keep whacking that up and make it pimply, nice. And it's all relative to what was there before. So I can increase and decrease the size of my clones. I can also still decrease the size of my object that it is cloning onto. So it's all non-destructive, which is quite cool. It's all there, it's all editable. And then I can do something else with this. So having a look at the cloner. So at the moment, my distribution is surface, which means, of course, it's distributing around its surface. I can change that to vertex. So for every point, there will be a sphere. I can change it to edge. So for every edge, there will be a sphere in the center of every edge. I can change it to polygon center. I'm not going to explain what that one does. Surface, which we were at, axis, which I'm just going to ignore, and volume. Now, volume I really do quite like, but you really need to hide the sphere, the one that it is mapping inside first. And you can see I now have a lot of spheres trying to make up the volume of a sphere. Now, this object can be anything we like. So if I was to, let's make another object. Let's make a cone, and let's add a couple of zeros to these as well. Dunk. Dunk. Let's make it much bigger. Okay, and let's change that the cloner is going to clone onto the cone instead. And I might just need to switch it off and back on again. There we go. And I'm going to hide the clone. There we go. And now I have a cone of clones. That's quite funky. Why do I get the feeling this should turn into a witch's hat? Being very Halloween-y right now. So the object mode is actually really cool. Certainly for volumes, you can have stuff dissipate and work into and out of that, which I really do enjoy, which is quite fun. So that is the cloner. The cloner can also clone more than one thing at once. So if I was to create a cube and I put a cube in my cloner as well, I have, yay, look, I have cubes and spheres in my clone. That's really funky. And I can even do, let's add a capsule. And so we've got capsules, cubes, and spheres all in my, which is now turning into a Christmas tree rather than a witch's hat, cloned object. And I'm just going to actually switch that back off, and I'm going to put it back to my grid array. So 10 by 10 by 10, here we go. I'm just going to wipe out those two, no longer needed. Now you can see that my clones are in a very nice order, and that order is capsule, cube, sphere. So capsule, cube, sphere, capsule, cube, sphere, capsule, cube, sphere, over and over again, and there it is. Okay, that's relatively simple. Ooh. Are you still with me there?
Yes, what happened there?
I don't know. You can still see my screen.
Yeah, definitely. I
Okay,
can.
I don't know what made a strange noise. Bear with me a second. I'm going to come off of the Galaxy. Hear me okay?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Marvelous. Okay, I think my headset was running out of battery, but I'm not sure. So yeah, we've got our clones, we've got our grid arrays, and you can see that it is in capsule, cube, sphere, because of the order that this is in. If I rearrange that, this episode slightly changes. Oh, don't do that. So cube, capsule, sphere instead, that goes round and round. I can also change the way that this is created using my clones. At the moment, this is iterating, so it will do that in order, basically. And I can choose things like random instead, which means it will randomly distribute these all the way through my cube. So I'm getting a random distribution now of the cube, capsules, and spheres all the way through. Okay, right, that's a good place to stop on the cloner before I start moving into other things. Have we got any questions on that?
So we've got one. If you make them dynamic, can they all fall onto a plane? So not so much a question about the cloner, more kind of dynamics with the cloner.
Yes, you can. So let's go 5 by 5 by 5, just because I have no wish to nobble my computer's processing power right now.
Do what I did and make it crash last week.
Yeah, I might pass on that if that's all right.
Yeah.
So if I just grab my clones up there, and then I will create myself a floor. And then on my floor, I'm going to add a simulation tag collider body, because that's the one that needs to stand still. And then on my cloner, I'm going to go to tag simulation, and I'm going to go to rigid body. Now, I do need to, do I need to change something? I can't remember if they've changed.
No, it does it by default now, applies it to children.
That's it. I did think you used to have to change it to register each of the individual elements, otherwise it would just fall down like a big block, but they have changed that preset now. Thank you so much. Which means I don't have to, and I can just press play and everything can fall down and hit the ground. Bounce.
Cool,
Seconds
thanks.
of fun. Anything else?
Yes. Can you animate the points of the cloner? And I think it's referring to the size. So you know when you were pulling the orange handles, which obviously translates to the size area that the clones are making up.
Oh yes.
Do that. Thanks.
So as we looked at last week with keyframes, so I'm just going to stick a keyframe there, and then I'm going to expand that out and stick a keyframe there. Whee! Yes. Next.
Cool. So the next question is something I think would be a cool topic actually for next week. So it's about changing the color, so the materials, the textures of the individual clones. And MoGraph color is a really cool topic. And so I was thinking, because we have a bit like an extra time when it comes to the rendering session, we could kind of dive into that and show how it can be done in both standard and in Redshift. So that is a great question, and it absolutely can be done.
And we will do that. Yeah, we'll look at that next week. Good idea.
Can you cache the count with more objects being in the scene if you were to animate?
Not quite sure I follow.
Is it about caching the cloner as an individual?
There's nothing to cache because it's not dynamic.
Let us know and then we'll. But yeah, that's all the questions for now. When a follow-up comes in to this one, I'll show it.
Yeah. Can you cache the count with more objects being in the scene if you were to animate? I think, Jay, you might be referring to our, because we can clone stuff a lot and then we can show only certain amounts, can't we? So if I've got to remember how to do this with render instances. So if I've got I don't even need a plane, do I? I just need that and a cloner. Please don't break my computer.
It's okay, you know we can fill.
I mean, in theory, this wow, that is now 10,000 long, and you can see that it's going a little bit slow. You can change to render instances, can't you? Which means it will be a bit faster for rendering. And I can change to multi instances, so I can turn off the bounding box, can't I? Or is this being really slow? In theory, yeah. So look at that. Using multi-instances, I'm now looking at 10,000 things, and it's just super fast, which is just insane.
Note that multi-instancing does not work correctly with dynamics.
No, so there are certain areas where multi-instancing is great, render instancing is great, and instancing is great. And to go into more detail, which I haven't got time to do, right click, go to help and have a look and see which one is going to be best for you, depending on whether or not you want render instance, multi-instance, or instance. Okay.
Jay saying you've explained it perfectly, Matt. So.
Oh, thank you very much.
Cool. Yeah, those are all the questions for now, but keep them coming.
Okay, right. So using this, not at 10,000. So just at 25, no, let's go 50 by 1 by 50. And I want to expand these out. 250 by 200 by 250, that doesn't matter. So that gives me a nice block, does it not? I'm just going to put that back to instances as well so that we know that we're where we should be. Now, clones are all very well and good, but what can you do with them? Well, one of the things that this is, of course, it is a MoGraph object, it is a MoGraph generator, okay? And I can use things called effectors on my clones. And they are found up here. No, they're fields. Where are they? Where are the effectors gone? Oh, I'm not used to this new layout. I'm really sorry. There we go. So we have a whole load of effectors. I suppose it does make sense that they are the same color as deformers because they can be used as deformers as well. We may come to that, we may not. The one I'm going to use quite easily at the beginning is the plane effector. So with my clone selected, so I have that orange to know that I have it selected, I'm going to click the plane effector. And you can see that it pops up like ever so slightly. Deactivate my plane effector, turn it on, yada, yada, yada. You can see it's doing something. If I select my plane effector and I go to my parameter, we will see that it is going up by 100 centimeters. Let's make that 500 so we can see a bigger jump. There we go. Why would you do that? I hear you ask. Why not just move the entire cloner up? Well, that's a very good question. Okay, I can do that. I can also do other things with my parameters here as well. I can affect my rotation. So let's affect my rotation in 45 degrees. Woo! I can do scale as well, but I'm not going to do that right now. So you can see now that these cubes all go up and turn 90 degrees, and that's wonderful. Now, that's affecting all of these cubes. So I've got my MoGraph object, the cloner, doing its generating, and I have my effector affecting the MoGraph object. Now, this is where the next bit comes in. What if I want to control where this plane effector is having an effect? And to do that, I use fields. So I'm going to select the field tab here with my plane effector selected, and I've got this little box that says, okay, what fields have you got? None at the moment. I can use the linear field, or I can double click to create a new field. So if I double click, it will create a spherical field. That's an interesting choice. But the one that I want here is the linear field. So I'm going to click and hold and click the linear field, and there I go. I now have half of my clones are up in the air, turn 90 degree, 45 degrees and turquoise, and the other half aren't. Now, what's causing this is my linear field. Just going to get rid of the spherical one there, don't need it at all. It's this little guy here. Okay, this is my linear field. And at the moment, my linear field is quite small. But if I move my linear field, you can see that it will affect some of my clones. You can see that if it goes here and it passes basically the central point of the cubes, that they raise or lower and turn 45 degrees and change color. So ding, 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 ding. Now, if I just zoom out, it makes a really interesting effect. Okay, depending on what you want to do. Now, the size of this is going to affect the look that we are trying to achieve. So what this actually has is a little arrow on the front, bump. Everything this side is 100% affected. Everything this side is 0% affected. So what I can do, I can expand that out so that I have a wider gradient so that it affects more cubes at once. And now Siri is trying to talk to me. What is going on today? So I can move this linear field from left to right, and I'm affecting all of the clones, making them move and change simply by moving the linear field. And because this linear field is wider, it affects more clones at once. Whereas if it's really small, it will only be able to affect one row at a time. And we can get some really interesting effects. So I can get some gradients there and some movements of stuff moving up and down. The fun thing about fields is I can have more than one. So with my plane effector, I'm going to double click again because I'm going to create, now it creates a linear field. That's really interesting. So it creates a second linear field, but I can easily change that if I want. Can't I? I thought I could. I swear you used to be able to change between linear field and non, which field it was. Well, I think, what?
No, I think you just have to select a different field.
That's really annoying. I swear you used to be able to do that. Okay, let's create another field then. So I'm going to create a spherical field. And once again, the size of this spherical field is ridiculously diddy. So I'm going to increase the size of my spherical field. And now I have two fields having an effect on my clones. So wherever this one is, it is maxing it out, but it will obviously not go any higher than the one that is over there, but it will blend the colors, which is really quite funky. So I can have that over here, but very much like blending modes inside of, you know, Photoshop and other things, I can choose how these all blend together. So I can do a minimum distance, which means that this will now only work when it's overriding. Or I can do subtracting, which means it will take itself away from what's there instead. I can turn off and on the color using these little 3 color things, which is really quite cool to do. And it allows you to just have so much fun with playing with random shapes and getting them in interesting positions without having to do a lot of individual modeling, which would of course be absolutely crazy. Okay, so what we have here, and this is the process that you need to remember, we have a MoGraph object of some sort, in this instance the cloner, creating clones. I have a plane effector that is affecting where the clones go. And then I have fields which control where the effector has its effect. So I've got to remember what I am working with when which one of these I want to edit. So I've got a cube, and if I want to change the size of the cube, then I would need to adjust the cube. So let's make that 100 instead. And you can see that that's now affecting all of my clones. Okay, what if I want them to go higher? Or what if I want there to be more of them? Okay, then that's where the cloner comes into play. So let's make that 60 by 60. So more clones is the cloner. How they are moved is all done by my plane effector. So let's say I want that to be 90 degrees now, and I want it to go up higher. So that's the plane effector. And then the fields are where that effector has its effect. Okay, so that's the thing that you've got to remember when dealing with the MoGraph workflow. It is 3 things, if not 4 in this instance: the object that is being changed, the MoGraph generator, the effector, and the field. Okay, that's quite a good place to stop on that part. Has anybody got any questions about this bit?
Do you know, there aren't actually any questions.
Wow.
You've given us all of the information that we could possibly need.
That's it. Either that or we've broken GoToWebinar and no one can ask us anything.
I hope not. Also, the most important question that has come in though is, where's the cat?
Where is the cat? The cat is currently on the sofa. He's asleep over there, but I do have my other cat currently making life very difficult for me using the mouse.
Is that why you're having technical issues? Is it just the cat?
Possibly, just randomly bashing. It's like, no, Don't know what's
Oh,
going
sorry,
on.
one quick question has actually
Ooh.
also come in. Can you use a field to affect the way the clones are distributed?
Yes, well, yes. Okay. That isn't a field as such, although it can be. This is where it all gets confusing. Right. So I'm going to cover this in two different ways. So I'm going to get rid of all of my other fields. So at the moment I have my cubes, my cloner is creating 60 by 60, and my plane effector is hoifing them all up. One of the fields that I can use is a random field. And this random field will randomly pick an area between where it was affected and unaffected and change that across all of them. So in this instance, it may be very similar to using a random effector on the clones itself without needing a field. But this allows you to control things a bit better. I mean, yeah, there wouldn't be much difference really, would there, between using a random field at this point and
So I think there was a follow-up to it, and I was just having a think, trying to get my head around it. So for example, more clones inside of where your spherical field is versus where it isn't.
No.
You could fake it with 2 cloner setups.
Yeah, that's
Then
pretty much
you
it.
control visibility of the second one. I was trying to think how to do it with one.
Ooh, no. I need it in the cloner, don't I? 25 by 25. So if I had that, and then I copied and pasted it, and I made that endpoint, let's make it a number that's easily divisible. So let's make that 30 by 30. And that's per step. And then I'm going to copy and paste that. And this one I'm going to set to endpoint, and I'm going to do 15 by 15. That's going to look really weird though, isn't it? Isn't it? I suppose so. I would then need a plane effector parameter for scale set to -1 maybe, which I could cheat. And I don't want it actually on that one. I want it on the one that's got lots. And then this one, I would have a field that's spherical, maybe, which is working the other way. So I would need to remap and invert. So turn off color. I can do that a bit.
If you go to the plane effector,
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to work pretty much the same way. Under parameter, turn off the scale. And then go down and press visibility at the very bottom.
Okay, so it's definitely on or off.
That could be a way. And someone was suggesting like a Python field. Yes, there would definitely be a way to put some kind of formula or code in.
Yeah, there's ways of doing it.
So that is a possible way of doing it.
Yeah, interesting one. Thank you.
It is a good one.
Okay.
We have a few questions that have come in. That's cool. Are each of the properties that contribute to this result keyframeable, or does a single keyframe combine all properties?
No, almost all of them will have an individual property, an individual keyframe that you can work with.
Yeah.
depending on what it is that you wanted to do. So the random field, as you can see, has scales and strengths and stuff like that. So I can have that scaled and I can have that keyframed. I can have the scaled keyframe. I can have the animation speed keyframed. The cloner, basically anything that's got one of these little animation diamonds means that you can keyframe it. So they will all be almost individual elements across each of the individual items, even though like the plane effectors, parameters, you know, what is or is not going to be affected.
Cool. What if I want actual different objects to be affected instead of clones of the one object?
Not sure I follow, but I think the fracture would do it.
Oh, unless you're referring to, because it's polygon/objects, unless you're referring to using the effector as a deformer in point mode and affecting an object instead of using it in a cloner setup.
Yeah, what if I
Might be
want actual
related to.
different polygons or objects to be affected instead of the clones of one object? I mean, technically there's two things that we can do. Let's see how quickly I can whip this up. If I've got a sphere and I have, what do I want? Where is it? PolyFX, which is a deformer, but it's kind of classified as a MoGraph thing. I'm going to stick that inside the sphere. That means that I will now be able to affect the polygons of this object. And again, I need a very similar setup. So with my PolyFX selected, I am going to create a plane effector, which will just move all of those out. I'm going to turn off position. This is one of my favorite ones to do. I'm going to turn on rotation. I'm going to turn on scale. I'm going to make that 90 degrees. And I'm going to change the uniform scale back to -1 because I know it will go to 0 then and it'll disappear. Boom. Oh, -17. No, -1, please. There you go. Bang. And then with my plane effector, I'm going to create a linear field, and then I'm going to go, but I always prefer to do this going up and down. So I'm going to change the orientation of my field, and then I'm going to go, and then I'm going to make my sphere have 4 times as many things because I like this even more. And then with my linear field, I can go, and I always get the feeling I'm now in Star Wars watching plans about the Death Star appear on my screen. So that's how you can manipulate polygons individually using the PolyFX deformer. The other one is if you want other objects of things that are made up of stuff. So let me, oh God. What's he doing, I hear you say? I'm making a really boring table. Badly. Yes, I have overshot that, I know. Table. What you can do, there is another MoGraph object which is called, it helps if I look in the MoGraph objects, the fracture, not the Voronoi. The Voronoi allows you to take an object and smash it to bits. The fracture allows you to take an object made up of its individual parts and edit them. So very similar, I can select all of my individual parts of my catastrophic table, put it under fracture, and then again, very similar, I will create a plane effector to affect all of my objects, and I will create a linear field to be able to affect individual elements of my table coming together like that. So that's how I would affect either polygons and or individual objects of something else.
Cool. That was pretty much all of the questions for now. Really quickly though, going back to, you know, when you had like the 10,000 cubes and you were looking at the different instancing modes, someone was wondering, will it's a bit of a tech question, will the specs of your computer kind of relate to how fast things will happen inside of Cinema 4D relating to instance mode?
Yeah, the amount of memory, the amount of processing power is trying to think about each individual clone, or whether or not it's thinking of a clone as something that it can reference. So the specs of your computer will have an effect on how fast your viewport refreshes and updates.
Cool. Yeah, that's it. Everyone's saying thanks for answering their questions as well.
Okay, no worries.
Cool.
What's next? What do I need to do next? So I've done MoGraph, I've done cloners, effectors, and fields. Oh, is it Voronoi time?
Voronoi Fracture.
Yay!
Yep.
Smashing. Sorry. So one of my favorite features from many a year ago is the Voronoi Fracture. And the Voronoi Fracture is, of course, another one of these MoGraphable objects. I've looked at the cloner. I've now just looked at Fracture exceptionally fast. I've looked at PolyFX. If we get time, we might have a chance to look at the tracer most spline instances. I don't know if Elly might look at the matrix a bit.
I'm going to use it. Kind of use it in a setup.
Awesome. So I'm going to look at the Voronoi Fracture, and the Voronoi Fracture, as I said a minute ago, allows you to take an object and smash it to bits. So I will take my object and I will put it inside the Voronoi Fracture, and you can see instantly it colorizes each of the individual fragments that this thing is smashing itself into. So just really quickly, if I look at my object tab of my Voronoi Fracture, I've got colorized fragments on and off. The reason why it's on is so it gives you an idea of what's actually happening. Otherwise, it's very difficult to see what's going on. I can offset the fragment, which basically means I can start cracking along the individual lines. And you can see that at a certain scale, they'll all start to disappear because there's very few of them left. But this is a really useful way of just being able to see the edges and create cracks and things inside of your objects. With the offset fragments at any number above 0, I can invert the result, and then I can get this really weird inverse shape, which I do kind of like. It's really quite funky, but what's uses are, I'll leave it to you. For that, you can also turn hull only as well, which means it will just do the outside of this, which I can remove, invert, and I can have hull only as well on this, which means I basically got some form of shell. To give it more of a shell-like, I'm going to increase its thickness. So there you go. I now have a hollow object based on the object that I had, and then I have a thickness of these segments, which is a really cool way of making cracking eggs, eggshells, Easter eggs, anything that's kind of like a hollow object with a surface inside. And if I turn off the hull only, that deactivates, and I'm just back to the surface offset fragments that I had before. Now, this is all being created. I'm just going to zero that back out. This is all being created by my sources. This is the sources for what am I splitting up into what. So with my point generator selected, what Voronoi Fracture actually does. Now, I did this with the doodle last time. Let's see if I can doodle it again. If I can remember where they've put doodles. There's doodling gone.
No, so on the main toolbar on the left, the very bottom.
Oh yeah. Oh, actually helpful place to put it. Marvelous.
Yeah, straight away, which is
cool. So what the Voronoi Fracture actually does is to create random point distribution like this. See, my drawing is astounding. And what it does is it takes the distance between these two and it draws a line. And then it takes a distance between these two and it draws a line. And then it takes a distance between those two and it draws a line. So if there's more points, then it will create these really weird and wonderful kind of splits between objects and lines and stuff to basically always be halfway in between each of the individual things. So when we have a look at our point generator, we have a seed amount. This is the number of points that it's creating, not the number of segments that it is ended up with, but 40 points and I'll end up with more segments. I can choose different seed creation as well, which is a random distribution of these seeds. I can transform these as well, so I can move them left and right and edit them and change them. Or I can change their distribution type entirely from uniform to normal, and normal relates to the polygon normal, not a normal distribution. Inverse normal, which is the other way around, and exponential, which is one of my favorites, because basically it allows you to sponge all of the dots up one corner. Great for if you actually want to smash things and you want to have the stuff smash. So let's turn that off and off, but it means that most of the points are now at the bottom, meaning that if I was to drop this on a floor and smash it to bits with dynamics, like I did last week, there would be lots of bits where it hits the ground and the larger bits would stay together. You can even go so far as into connecting bits together, gluing bits together so that stuff stays together as well, using fields and things like that. There's an awful lot of things that you can do that allow you to maneuver exactly how you want stuff to work. But we don't have time to go into it completely today, unfortunately. But that is very quickly how you manipulate the point generator distribution of where you want the points. But another one of the fun things that you can do with the point distribution, the point generating, is you can use other objects. So I'm just going to toggle that off. Bye-bye. And then I'm going to create me a plane. And this plane has 10 by 10 segments. And what I can do in my Voronoi Fracture, I can click and drag my plane into my sources. And now what it's doing, it is using the polygons of this object to generate nice square segments, basically. And then I can be really crazy if I want to. So with my plane, I'm going to create simulation tag. I'm going to create a collider body, and on my Voronoi Fracture, I'm going to create a not a rigging simulation rigid body. Press play. Chips or fries, depending on what you want to call them. I suppose for me, fries would be smaller. And if I want fries, then what I would do is I would decrease the width segments of the plane, or rather I would increase the number of segments that there are on the plane so that there are more cubey planey things to smash my potato to bits, which is wonderfully hypnotic. But the Voronoi is just so much fun. As you can see, that's dynamically available. You can edit and play with all of the individual areas. They say you've got connectors abilities, you've got glues, you've got transformations and stuff, making it hollow, making it bits. It's a really, really powerful and versatile tool for doing all sorts of weird and wonderful dynamic things with. But equally, I'm just going to get rid of my plane, turn my Voronoi and turn my sources back to that, and turn that back to normal. Because it is a MoGraph object, I can, of course, use other things like my plane effector. Okay, so let's have my plane effector move all of my segments up. Okay, that's interesting. That's not quite what I wanted. So what do I need to do? Let's control it with a field. So I can get my linear field, and now if I move my thing from do to do, I can control where all of this goes. But the plane effector is really boring for this one. It's a bit too plain. So with my Voronoi Fracture selected, I'm going to show you another one of our effectors, and this one is my random effector. Now what this one is doing, I have some values here. Let's make it a bit wider. So 500 by 500 by no, not 5,000. 500, 500, 500. So I have a kind of maximum space value allowed for my random effector, and it is then randomly choosing coordinates anywhere within that 0 to 100 range that I have set to randomly place these individual elements. And then I can, of course, go to my fields and I can create me a linear field, and then I can use my linear field to go to bring all of my smashed bits together, which is really quite nice. I'm just going to shrink that down so it's not having so much of an effect on too many of them at once. There we go, and you can see that that comes together and falls apart, and that's really cool. Now, what if I wanted, I'm going to make more points. I like more points. Let's make 100 points. and let's spread them out further. So using the random field, let's make this 1,000, 1 million, no, 1,000, 1,000, 1. Not particularly helpful. So they're now much over a much wider area, and I can grab my linear field, and I can go, there we go. So I'm going to shrink that even more now so that it's not affecting too many of them at once. And you can see that they come together or fly apart. I can even, with my random field, let's choose some rotation and let's make it, let's go crazy, 90, 90, 90. So now these individual components rotate and fly in as well, rather than just, you know, moving into position. They now sort of rotate into where they are to finalize or fly off, depending on what I want them to do. But what if I wanted to change the scale of these? Okay, what if I wanted them all to start at select 0 and then appear as they move and fly? If I use the random effector, things are going to not work properly, because if I choose a scale of -1 like I've done before, the random effector will choose a value anywhere between 0 and -1 to change this. So they won't all start at 0. So what I'm going to do with my Voronoi Fracture selected, I'm going to create my plane effector again. Now this by default is shoving all of the things up by 100 centimeters, and I'm going to turn that off and say bye-bye. And I'm going to turn my scale on, go to uniform scale and do -1, which means now all of my individual elements are starting at nothing and will expand. Or would they? If I look at my field, I've got nothing there. So currently it's having an effect on all of my clones. Now, what I've done previously is I've added a linear field, but I don't want a second linear field. I already have one, and I want it to control both. So I'm going to click and drag my linear field that I've already made and put it in my fields area for my plane effector. And now, because this is just associated because it is, I can move it wherever I like, and its association will remain the same. So with my linear field, if I move this across, I have stuff that creates itself in different scales and then moves. And I can control how this stuff creates and then appears and then blows up, which I think is really cool. Yeah, I think that's a really useful way of being able to affect two things at once. Okay, are there any questions about this?
Yes. So this is quite a good one. Can you also move the fragments of the Voronoi fracture with the dynamic place tool?
No.
It has to be made editable.
Yeah. So these individual components, and also just quickly, whilst if anyone saw me do that, I get a different result under the Voronoi fracture if I have the random field first, which is then randomly distributing stuff and then shrinking things. If I want a nicer result, which is what I was after under my Voronoi, if I reorder those, I will actually get a different result, which I prefer, which is that everything starts to appear and then comes together all in one go like that, which I really like. The dynamic place tool is about randomly placing or dynamically placing objects onto things. At this point, there isn't anything to place anywhere as such. So yeah, as Elly said, I'd have to make my Voronoi fracture editable, and then I would have to dynamically place individual elements in order to get them to be dynamic.
Cool. I don't know if there is a way to do this, but so basically, when you make a plane, then you make a sphere, because of where the axis is of each of the objects. When you create them, the sphere is obviously intersecting with the plane.
Yes.
Is there any way to prevent things from coming in at kind of below floor level? I think it's just based on
yes, sort of, but because everything, oh, that's a really good question. Because everything is created at 0, like I say, if I do that, it creates that at 0. If if I was to create a sphere, it wouldn't, because it creates the center point of the sphere at 0 and is not registering the floor. You can change something, which I now need to remember where it is because I've seen it. Come on, brain, where is it? Ah, come on. There is, oh, there it is, it's right in front of me. Under interface, sorry, options, create new object at center of view, which means if I create a cube here, it creates it there. If I'm higher and create a cube, it will create it in the center, but it won't have anything to do with the floor. There is no way of bringing objects, creating brand new objects directly onto a floor. That's what the dynamic place tools are for. And that object is just under preferences and then create it at center of view. And you can also choose whether or not where it creates the object in the object manager as well, whether it creates at the top or the bottom of the list.
That's cool. Thanks.
That's right.
Can you rotate each individual fragment of the Voronoi fracture?
No. That was an easy one. I mean, the random effector is affecting each of them, but because it's these individual fragments are being created by the Voronoi and then being randomly distributed by the random and plane effectors, these don't exist as individual objects for me to edit and change. Once again, I'd have to make my entire object editable if I wanted to position them differently.
Cool. That seems to be all the questions for now.
Okay.
Oh, oh yeah, Adonis was just saying you can manipulate individual fragments using mode selection.
I was wondering about that, but I'm not sure it's the, well, yeah, I mean, technically you can. So if I go to MoGraph, if I go to mode selection and I pick an object, that one, that gives me a selection. In theory, I could use a field to change that or something to be able to manipulate it, but it's a bit fiddly in order to do it. That's all. Okay, anything else?
No, that seems to be it for now.
Right, well then, I think it's time I throw the screen at you and you can show us some stuff that's useful with it.
Everything you just showed is super useful.
You make it look more fun. Right, so where are you? There you are. I'm throwing the screen at you now.
Cool. Let me know when you can see my screen.
I can see your screen.
Lovely. Let me just move my mic up so you guys don't hear me tapping away. Okay, cool. So we have a whole hour. I'm so excited. We have a whole hour left because I have a load of different things that I want to show. So the first setup, which one should we do first? Let's do this one first. So I'm just going to play this through a couple of times. And basically it's just some really fun kind of springy, bouncy text using 2 different effectors and 2 keyframes. That's it, to create this kind of sort of this fun looking text. And so we're going to start off with this kind of setup, and then we're going to then look at one that does the Voronoi fracture. Then we're going to look at one that has, so the letter we looked at last week that was kind of like filling up with some dynamic spheres, I've remade that with the cloner. And then Adonis is also wondering how to create this sort of torus effect, so I might quickly show that at the very end. But let's get into it. I'm going to stop talking and get actually into what I'm going to do. So feel free to follow along. Project files are also on there, but we're going to build these all from scratch, so you'll be building them yourselves now anyway. So first things first, I'm going to come in and I'm going to grab some text. And I've been setting up presets, as you can see, which is why it comes in looking a little bit weird. So I'm actually going to, what am I going to do? I'm going to grab some nice round text. So the one I like is this like Balubajan. And it just creates this really kind of nice looking text here. And let me just change my caps to 1 centimeter. Cool, so we're going to write the word bounce. And this is going to be kind of like the effect that we're going to create. So here we go. I was wondering why it was on the outside. Cool, right, so we have our nice like bounce text, and I went with this nice kind of like curvy one because when we're looking at kind of creating this kind of fun cartoony springy effect, the nice rounded font just sort of goes with it. But by all means, you can use pretty much whatever font you want for this setup. The only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my depth just to 30 centimeters, just so it's a little bit bigger. And everything else I'm going to leave as it is. Cool. So, right, what we're going to do first. So the first things first, I'm actually going to set up my camera view because the idea is our letters all kind of begin outside of view and then they kind of come up and then they come into view. And so we're going to set up our camera first. So I'm just going to use a standard Cinema 4D camera and we're gonna look through it. And the way that we can do that is up in my object manager, we have this little kind of like square here. And if we click that, it's going to go white. And this now means I'm looking through my camera. And so if I then move around, I'm changing where my actual camera is. So if we kind of come back, we can go Command Shift and Z or Z, brings you back to your original camera view. So I'm going to just set up a focal length. This is just kind of my own personal preference. And then in my coordinates, I'm just going to zero out my rotation and I'm just going to find a nice, just sort of like centering this basically by moving around my coordinates inside of my camera. Cool, so that's looking pretty good. So now I've got my camera kind of like field of view that I'm after, and I've got where my letters are going to end up. And so now I can start to introduce some effectors and some fields to make it look like my letters are kind of appearing from out of view into this nice center bit. So this text object, so anyone who is pre-24 will have inside of your MoGraph menu something called MoText. If you are on anything pre-24, that is the text object that you'll need to be using. Anyone that's on 24 and 25, they actually kind of combined the text primitive with the MoText. And so now, even though this is kind of like in the primitives menu, it actually is a MoGraph generator. So don't let it fool you. It can be used with effectors. So with my text selected, because that's my main thing, I need to have it selected before I use an effector. I'm going to come into my effectors and I'm going to grab a plane. I'm going to keep it super simple and I'm just going to use a plane to control some position on my y-axis. So inside my parameter, we have by default a position of 100 centimeters on the y. So everything has gone up by 100 centimeters. Cool. But the thing is, I'm going to set up my field first, and then I'm going to set up my parameter. And this will make sense when we do it. So inside my fields menu of my plane, I'm actually just going to use a linear field. Where is that? There we go. Cool. So we've got our linear field. And so as I'm moving my linear field, we can see that it is having an effect. So everything to the left-hand side of my linear field. So this is direction plus X, which is why it's kind of facing this way in my viewport. Everything to the left isn't being affected. So all the letters to the left of my linear field aren't being affected by my plane effector. Everything to the right is being 100% affected, and everything in the middle, as we can see, is kind of like a gradient of 0% to 100% of being affected. Cool, so this is okay, but it's not looking right. I actually need my letters to be coming from below and then coming up to the center, as opposed to starting in the center and then going even higher. And so all we need to do is inside of our plane effector, we go to our parameter, and then we just need to have a minus value in our y. So I'm going to pull it all the way over until they've disappeared. So let's go minus 300. That should be okay. Then now as we bring this all the way over, we can see that our letters, when our linear field is all the way to the left, are starting out of view. And then we put it all the way across and they come into view. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. So now let's set up some keyframes for our linear field. And these are the only keyframes we're going to use for this entire setup. So we're going to grab my linear field. We're going to come over to my coordinates, and I'm just going to pull it all the way over until the first letter is out of view. So something like that. And then I'm going to hit a keyframe, and I'm on frame 0. And then at the very end, so on frame 90, this is when I want all of my letters to have appear. So I'm going to pull it all the way over until that E is there. And I'm going to hit another keyframe. Cool. So we've set up the first part of our animation. Super simple. Doesn't look very interesting though, but we have the starting point. So if we're looking back at this animation, what else have we got going on? So we have a bunch of other things, a bunch of kind of additional animation going on. The first of which is we have a bit of kind of like a like jiggle at the end, but we also have our letters kind of stretching. And so we're going to focus on the jiggle first. We'll kind of like the bouncy bit as they come up, and then we're going to focus on the stretch. Right, so how do we create that additional little bit of kind of bouncy animation? And that is really simple. All we have to do is use another effector, and we don't really have to change too much in it. We don't have to set up too many parameters, and we don't have to set up any keyframes. So with my text selected, I'm going to come into my effectors, and the effector that we want is called a delay effector. And so if we come into our effector, we have, by default, we have a strength value like we do on all of our effectors. But for this one, we have a couple of different modes, even, blend, and spring. So blend is the one that's on by default. And if we just sort of up this strength value to 80, what will happen is it kind of just slows at the end. Hopefully that's noticeable through the webinar. But it kind of like, it comes up and it just sort of slows down and eases to a nice smooth end, which looks nice. But what we want is a bit more of like a springy effect. So we're going to change our mode to spring. We're going to leave our strength on 80% because I think that's quite a good value. And we're going to play. And now we get this additional little kind of bounce at the end of our animation, and we haven't had to set up any keyframes. And so if you had to kind of like keyframe this effect, whether in Cinema 4D or whether in After Effects, it could take you like a substantial amount of time in comparison to just adding this effector and then changing the mode. Cool. Right, so far we've made our text. We then used a plane effector with a linear field to make our letters appear from out of our view. And then we just added a delay effector in spring mode to create that additional little kind of bounce. Now let's focus on how we can create this kind of stretching. So we come into here and we can see we have our letters aren't just sort of bouncing, but they also now have this kind of sort of stretch. And this is how we're going to set this up. We're going to actually create this with a deformer. But the important thing when we're using kind of the deformer with our text is we need to put it inside of a connect. So a connect generator is something I think we've used a couple of times throughout the last few weeks, and it can just be found inside of our generators here. So we grab a connect, and we're going to just drop our text into our connect. And the most important thing here is we want to switch off the weld option. That's the key thing. And this is going to help when we then add our jiggle deformer. So inside of our deformers, we're going to grab a jiggle. And the way that this needs to be is it needs to just be kind of in between our connect and our text. So sort of this is how it looks. And now this is how we have it. So inside of Jiggle, we have a few different options. So we have a strength value, so it can control the amount that this deformer is having an effect on our object, which for us is our text. We have a stiffness value, which is kind of how kind of like stiff our deformation is going to be. So obviously the higher the value, the kind of less deformation we're going to get. Structural is our object is going to try and maintain its structural shape as much as possible, and drag is sort of, it kind of works like friction. So if I increase my drag too much, we won't get too much of an effect happening because there's kind of sort of too much friction going on. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change a few of these values. My stiffness I'm going to change to 20%, and if I press play, we're not really getting that kind of stretch effect. We're just kind of getting a bit more of an aggressive bounce going on, which I mean looks cool, but that's not really the effect that we're after. And so what we can do, the way that we can get this this kind of stretching effect is actually by using a field inside of our deformer. So if I come into my field.
Can I ask a quick question, Elly? Sorry.
Yep.
Jeff is asking, can you explain again why you need a connector and why you can't just place the jiggle and the text into a null?
I'm not sure of the technical reason. I just know it works with the connect. Should I try it with a null? Matt, would you know if it worked with a null?
Let's see whether or not it does the same thing.
Cool, right, so let me just put it all out. And then we're going to put our text into a null. And then we're going to jiggle. So it's not doing anything. So I'm not 100% sure of the technical reason as to why it doesn't do it. But in order to make it work, it does need to be inside of a connect. Matt, do you know the technical reason why?
No, I'm just trying to think. I wonder if it's because of the type of object that the text object is. The connect solidifies them all together.
Because it's like a MoGraph generator, and so if I was using a MoGraph generator with a deformer, you always have to put it into a connect. And so I think the confusion is because it looks like a primitive.
Yeah.
I think.
But I wasn't sure either until you did it.
Yeah, it was good to check because I wasn't 100% sure if it would work. I just know it definitely works with connect, and I think it's down to it being because it's a MoGraph generator object. It's different kind of parameters. Cool. So let's just sort of drop all this back into here and get rid of that. So yeah, we have too much bouncing going on. So let's go back into our jiggle and let's add ourselves a linear field. And what I'm going to do, because I want my stretch to happen on my Y position, I'm actually just going to change this to, I can't remember which it was. I think a -Y value. I'm just going to raise up my linear field. And then now, as we press play, our linear field, so where our linear field is based, as well as its direction, is going to basically tell the jiggle deformer where and how to kind of deform and stretch our text. So now as you press play through, we're now getting that additional kind of like pull down of our text. And so this is when we can come back into the jiggle and we can affect some of these. So, just to kind of witness what drag does, if I put it up to 80%, it's almost like fake friction, kind of preventing it from happening as quick. I quite like it on 10. Cool. Cool. So that was the very first setup. So as we said, like really clean, really simple. Doesn't take long to set up. All we had was our text, and we used a plane effector with a linear field to make it appear. And then we use a delay to add that additional little bounce, and that can be used on pretty much any kind of animating. It doesn't just need to be like this. And then we just dropped our text into a connect, so we could then take advantage of using deformers And for this, we use a jiggle deformer, and then we just positioned our linear field and kind of based its direction on how we wanted that stretch to happen. Do we have any
Awesome.
questions?
No, the only one was the connector object. So thank you.
Cool. Right, so which one do I want to do now? I'm thinking we do something cool with the Voronoi Fracture.
Yay.
So, so this is a, you know what, if I switch off colorized fragments, I think it looks cooler.
Oh, I like that. That's cool.
Sort of play this through, and this is really, as you can see, like all of these setups are really, really simple, and they don't take a lot of kind of different tools. So we're going to kind of just build this now from scratch. Let's come into here. And so you could do this with a logo and it could look really cool. And I thought about doing it with a logo, but then I thought if people can follow along, they may not have the logo. So instead, we'll just stick to doing it with the number 5. So again, I'm going to grab my text and I'm going to just put in the number 5. And let's find a nice, I wanted like a nice like square font. So let's go with Roboto. And then we're going to go black. And then inside my caps, I'm just going to change these. They're back to like the default now. I've just added a size of 1 centimeter in the cap. And then the only other thing I want to do is I'm going to increase my depth to something, is 50 a bit overkill? No, we'll leave it on 50 because like it's nice kind of like nice big surface area for when we're going to kind of like Voronoi fracture it into a bunch of slices. Okay, cool. Right, so first things first is going to be to set up our Voronoi fracture. So we're going to come into our MoGraph menu, and then we're just going to grab our Voronoi fracture, and then we're just going to drop our text into it. And as Matt showed us, you know, by default, we have this point generator as a source. But as he also showed us, we can use a bunch of different things as sources inside of the Voronoi fracture. So I'm actually just going to delete that point generator because we don't need that one. And so now we have no fragments going on. We just have our solid 5. And inside of our MoGraph menu, we have this object called the matrix. And you might look at it and think, Elly, it's just the cloner cloning a bunch of cubes. Not really. So the matrix object basically creates what are called matrices, or if you've heard of it, thinking particles. And it can be used in a variety of different kind of settings. For a start, it's actually a MoGraph generator, so we can affect these matrices with effectors and fields. And then you can use it to then, you could use it inside a cloner in the object mode to clone things onto those matrices. If you use third-party renderers like Redshift or Octane and you put a object tag on it, you could clone and render objects without slowing down your viewport because it's technically creating matrices instead of geometry. But instead of going too much into that, we're just going to use it as a point source inside of the Voronoi fracture. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change my count to 1 by 50 by 1. And I'm just going to change it to endpoint, and I'm going to pull this all the way down so they're a lot closer together. So basically what we're going to do, we're going to use this matrix as our point generator, and it's going to create a point per matrix, and therefore it's going to create some slices along our text or whatever object we have in here. So inside of our Voronoi fracture, all we have to do is drag and drop the matrix into here. We can actually pull it over. We don't need it necessarily in the center, or we can even use our traffic lights to hide it as well. Actually, yeah, why not? Let's just hide it. Cool. So I actually might increase this a bit more and have maybe like 75. So we have some thinner slices. Right. So now we've set up our kind of different fragments. We can now use some effectors to create that sort of spiraling kind of coming together effect. And it actually only uses one effector, but we're going to control the position, the scale, and the rotation, all based on that one effector. So if we come into our Voronoi Fracture, we can, again, grab a plane effector, because this one's going to work the best for us. And by default, everything has been kind of pushed up on the Y by 100 centimeters. That's fine. Let's just leave it at that for now. And I'm going to set up my field. So if we have a look at this setup, this is just using, one plane effector and then one linear field, and it controls all of those different kind of parameters. So let's grab our linear field. I'm going to change it. So at the moment it's looking a little bit funky, and that's because our direction is on the x-axis and we need it to be on the y. And then maybe we just make this linear field a load smaller. Let's go like 30. And so now as you raise this up, everything is coming together. So that is the first part, that is the position. But the problem is we have now kind of all of this stuff above. We're not actually kind of getting rid of any of our geometry. And we can do that by coming back into the plane, coming back into our parameter, and then under scale, what we want to do is we want to affect the scale uniformly. So we don't want to just be affecting the scale on an individual axis. If you did, then absolutely we can do that. But we want to do uniform scale. And then we want everything to be kind of at kind of when it goes out of view to have been scaled down 100%, so we don't see it in our scene. So let's just do a value of -1. So now as we put it down, it's kind of appearing and scaling up and kind of coming together. It's just going to my Voronoi Fracture and switch off colorized fragments because I don't need to see them for this. Cool, so that's position and scale. Now all we have to do is switch on inside of my same plane effector. We want to switch on our rotation. So I switch on my rotation, and I know it's rotation on the H. So I'm just going to enter a value of 360. So now as we bring our linear field down, we'll bring it up. Everything is coming down. All our fragments are coming down. They're spinning 360 degrees, and they're coming from the 100 centimeters up on the Y, as well as now scaling up from -1 up to their full size. And then it just sort of then looks like it's building this number. And so lastly, let's have a look at what's happening. So we need to keyframe our linear field, but we also have this kind of slow-mo effect happening. And this is a really quick thing we can set up. And so again, this uses just one field and 2 keyframes. So I like to keep it simple. So let's keyframe our linear field first. So what we're going to do, we need it to be on frame 0. We don't want to see anything. So let's pull this all the way out until we can't see anything. And we're going to keyframe our Y position because now we're moving our linear field up and down. So we know it's the Y. I'm going to set a keyframe here when everything has disappeared. And then on frame 90, I'm going to pull it all the way up until everything has fully appeared and it's kind of created our entire 5. I'm going to hit another keyframe. And now as you press play, we now have our animation. But how do we create that slow-mo? So as Matt showed us last week when we looked at kind of animation and keyframing, we have our timeline in here. So if I hit this little hot corner, we have our timeline. And this is where we can see all of our individual keyframes for the different elements in our scene. So what I'm going to do, my mic is very in the way. What I want to look at is I want to be controlling my F curves. And if we have a look at our position, we can maybe pull it up a little bit more. At the moment, as you play through, we have like this ease in and ease out. So what's happening is our animation is starting slow. So basically our linear field, the way it's moving is it's starting slow, and it speeds up, and it slows down again. But to create the slow-mo effect, all we have to do is kind of like swap this around. So if I grab, so at the moment, both of my points are selected. If they're not, just shift click both. And then we're going to grab our Bezier handles. Let me pause that. And I'm going to frame everything so I can see. And I'm going to just alternate them. Maybe I need a little bit more room so I can actually see what's going on. And so because I've got both points selected, as I'm moving one of my handles, it's going to move the other one. And so now if we sort of create something, I don't know, maybe like this, it's going to start fast, slow down to an almost kind of stop, and it's going to speed up again. And then if we just get rid of this, now if we watch, so our animation and our linear field happens really quick at the beginning, and it slows down to get this really nice kind of like smooth, like slow-mo effect, and it speeds up again. And I really like this. I really like this effect. I think it's so simple, and the fact it's like 2 keyframes that you just have to adjust the interpolation, it's just really nice. Cool, yeah, so this is how we created that second setup with our text. And the coolest thing, let's change this to something else. It's kind of procedural, so it's kind of non-destructive, so we can kind of put whatever we want in here, and it's going to update in real time. Any questions?
Nope, nothing.
I sent everyone to sleep.
Oh, there is one. Is an interesting one. This may be going too far, but can we make each segment of the 5 bounce as it lands?
Potentially. Bounce.
Wibble, yes. Bounce.
Yeah, bounce maybe.
Uh,
So if we go to the 5, and then with
could
my
you?
Voronoi Fracture.
Could you add a decay? Make it delay. Make it spring, but clamp it.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm going to try one way, which I don't think is going to work. It's just going to be really simple delay effector. I don't think it's going to work though. Okay, you know what? If we add some more frames, you might actually be able to see what's going on. So we kind of have this
Wibbly
kind of look happening. Maybe if I switch those off, let me just have. So that kind of does it. And so basically what I did was the same old thing, added a delay effector.
Can you delete the delay effector? Try this. Select the linear field and then add a delay here.
Delay.
Yeah.
Spring.
Yeah.
Let's go like 70.
There is no clamp there, is there? Oh, there is. Wibbly. That might. Whoa, that's a bit much.
Yeah.
Can you lower the effect strength of that to, I don't know, 10%?
I'm talking low. So yeah,
There's kind of,
it as well.
yeah, I think it, because of the speed that this is going, I say it's quite difficult to get, I think.
I guess that is probably a way of doing it though. I'd say that looks like it's kind of creating that.
Yeah, I think that's as close as we'd be able to get without just swapping over to dynamics.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been my next kind of,
Yeah.
my next sort of guess. Okay, cool. If there's no other questions, we can.
Someone has asked, remember last time you showed us the target tag? Can you ask Elly if you can show us how to reposition unidirectional lights by using them as a camera instead of tediously switching between the move and rotate tools? It's just a useful tip to share. Because you use lights as cameras, don't you? So that you can view in and then.
Yeah. Yeah, so if I had, I mean, I'd normally do it like if I have a light, maybe I'd have to have something in the scene to make it look semi interesting. And then you can actually go to camera. Why can I not? Why is it not giving me? Sorry, I was being blind then. So with my area light selected, doesn't just need to be redshift. This could be any light. I'm just used to using redshift. We can go to selected object as camera. So as soon as I select this, it's going to basically have made my area light a camera, my camera that I'm now looking through. And what you can see is at the very top here, it actually says RS area light, and that's implying that this is what I'm using as sort of like a default camera now. And it's a really easy way of repositioning lights in your scene without having to worry about, as the person was saying, move, scale, or rotate, or even worrying about like the target tag. You can really kind of define exactly where you want them to face. And then if we go back into like our default camera, we can then see that our light is now up where we just kind of left it. So yeah, that is a really cool tip that I do use quite frequently as well.
Cool, thank you. Going back to your 5 scene, Jose is just asking, is it now really easy to change what the text says? So if you made that 4, because it's just a text object, you couldn't you? Or swap it out with another object of a relative size. Yeah, you could do that really easily.
Yep, so at any point we can change this entirely, because we didn't have to make it editable for any of these setups, which is super handy.
Cool, thank you very much. That's it.
Cool, right, so what am I, not this one. This one, that's the one I want. Okay, so this was something I wanted to show last week that we actually ran out of time on. The only difference is last week I was using the emitter for this setup, whereas now, because we're in MoGraph, I can use the cloner. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play this through. And so basically what's happening is we have two clone setups, and they are kind of creating these spheres, and it is then filling this shape. And so we can do this in a couple of different ways, but I think this is quite a cool way. And this also, as you can see, uses dynamics. So we are going to set this up using some MoGraph stuff. So I'm going to stick to this scene here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how you can use the cloner to create spheres. And so the cloner can be really handy if you're doing sort of like relatively simple particle stuff without having to worry about using kind of the emitter and actual kind of particles inside of Cinema 4D. So first things first, I'm going to grab myself a cloner. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to clone 3 different spheres. And the thing is, some people are probably looking at this and thinking, oh, Elly, why didn't you use like one sphere and use the random to randomize the scale? And I could have done that, but then I would have needed to have faffed with MoGraph color, and I didn't really want to do that. I just wanted to kind of easily texture these different spheres. And so that is why I'm using 3 different spheres. So let's grab a sphere. And the first one we're going to make, oh, I've forgotten now, 3 centimeters. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to look at how we can kind of create a whole load of these dynamic spheres before we then go into this setup. So we want these two things to work together. We want to clone our spheres. So all we need to do is with our sphere, we need to make a child of our cloner. And now we can see we have a grid array of spheres. Inside my cloner, my mode, let me just move that out of the way. My mode, I'm going to set to linear. And so as Matt was showing us, we now have 3 spheres moving up on the Y position. But what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to just zero out my Y position because I want them to kind of just appear from this area and kind of look like they're being emitted from this one spot. So if I increase my count, we can't actually see anything. We can still only see this one sphere. We do have more of them, but we need to kind of have this animate, and then we also need to add some dynamics in. So we're going to set up the animation first. So I'm going to start on a count of 0 on frame 0, and I'm going to hit this little diamond on my count. And then at frame, I don't know, 60, we're going to put a value of 50. And I'm going to keyframe that. Press play. Nothing's really happening. But if we watch our count, we can actually see it is going up. And so the way that we can make it look like these are being emitted and kind of interacting with one another is by adding some rigid body dynamics to them. And so what we want to do is with our cloner, we're going to right click, simulation tags, and go to rigid body. And now when we press play, we are kind of emitting out of our cloner 50 spheres, and they're all interacting with one another, and they're all kind of like bouncing off one another. Okay, so that is the general principle of how we set up our cloner to do this. And now what we're going to do, we're going to create this setup using this different technique. So let's just build it all again from scratch, just for fun. So I'm going to grab, what am I going to do first? Let me grab the shape that it's going to make up first. So I used I'm pretty sure I used like the letter S. And so again, text is being overused today. I'm going to grab my text and I'm just going to write the letter S. And again, we want to have maybe, yeah, a nice sort of like smooth, font. And I might even just make it a little bit bigger on the depth. Let's go 30. Cool, so this is the shape that our particles or dynamic spheres are going to make up. So now we can set up our kind of emitting cloners. So I'm going to grab my cloner, and then I'm going to grab a couple of different size spheres. So my first one is going to be 3 centimeters. My next one is going to be 5. And my next one, so I'm just command clicking and dragging to duplicate them. And my final one is just going to be 8. And just so it looks a bit nicer, let's kind of increase our segment so we get that nice kind of like smoothing in our viewport. And it shouldn't slow it down too much. Like the benefit of using the cloner is even with the amount of spheres we're going to be kind of emitting or using, the playback should still be pretty fast, which is good. So now what I want to do is I want to clone all of these spheres. So I'm going to grab all of them. So I click the first one and then I press Shift and I click the last one just to highlight them all, and they're all orange so we know they're highlighted. And I'm just going to make them a child of my cloner. And so now what's happening is it's iterating and cloning on grid array, all of them. So now we just want to do that same thing that we did before and change it to linear. We want to remove any position values. And we're going to start off with a count of 0. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to increase my frame so we have a bit more time to play with. And I'm actually now going to position my cloner. I'm going to put one kind of up here for it to start and another one up here, because if we kind of look back to this and we press play, we can see that kind of everything is appearing from the top and also from the bottom. So I'm going to come into my 4 views and I'm going to grab my first cloner and I'm just going to position it up here. And then we also want it to be in the center of our text as well. Okay, and now what I need to do, actually we won't do that yet, we'll duplicate it later. Now what I want to do is I need to set up some animation again on my count. And so I can't really remember what I did my count to. 125. Okay, it's a cheap way of doing it. Right, cool. So what I'm going to do on frame 0, I'm going to make sure my count has a keyframe on 0. And then on frame 120, we're going to enter 125, because I eventually want there to be 125 of these spheres on here. And I'm going to do that again. Now the final step is to add our dynamics again onto our cloner. So I'm going to right click my cloner, I'm going to go to simulation and rigid body. But the important thing here is we also need to make our text dynamic. Because at the moment, if I just press play, everything's just going to kind of fly out. And that's because we haven't told Sim4D that our S, or the area that we want to fill with our spheres, is dynamic too. So we're going to right click our text or whatever object you're using, come into simulation, and then we want it to be a collider. And now it's going to collide. So now what we can do, because I don't want to see this, I don't want to see my S, I don't want to deactivate it, because then it won't work in our scene. But I can use these 2 little dots, and if I make them both red, we're going to hide our S. But now when I press play, it's now working as it should. And then what we can do, or what I did, was I actually duplicated my cloner. So this is now cloner top, and this is going to be cloner bottom. And I'm just going to put it down. And so I can hide my text again. And so now I'm going to have one cloner at the top doing what it was normally doing. And my second one is now going to be doing the same thing, but filling up from the bottom. I'm going to press play. Cool, so we're losing a few. So there's a couple of reasons why. One, we obviously have too many to fill our area. So we can come back into here. And if we just go to where our keyframe is, we can actually just change the count to 100 and re-keyframe it, and it's going to update. But it's important to do the same thing on our other cloner as well. So I'm just going to reduce this value and then see what's happening now. Cool, so we're still losing some, so we could do the same thing, or we can go to Command D, which is something we looked at last week, and we can kind of increase our steps per frame. And this should now keep them in. So we're still losing a few, and that's because we still need to reduce our count a little bit. So let's just go down a bit more. Maybe like, I don't know, something like 70 and 70. So this is important when it comes to kind of messing with dynamics and doing stuff like this. It's going to take some tweaking just to find kind of the perfect amount. Cool, so this is now working really well. We're not really losing any of our spheres either. And so this is how you would fill the surface area. And then all I did as well, I just textured it from the asset browser. So I like a mix of like white, black, and gold. And so if you search gold in your asset browser, you can get a gold texture. And all we do is double click, and it's going to show up in our material manager, which is in here. And then we can grab a white, there should be a white gloss somewhere. And then I think there's a black rubber. Yes. And then I just sort of put these on a couple of different random things inside of here. Maybe like that, and then like that. And then, yeah, this is how I created that sort of dynamic filling up kind of particle emitter with the cloner. So yeah, last week I did it with the emitter, but personally I would stick to using the cloner because you have way more control of the sort of things that you want to do. The only thing I would say about this, even though our text is not editable, if you change the shape, you might also need to slightly reposition where your cloners are because they're filling from inside of the text. If I decided to, I don't know, what's something I could change this to? Like 3. We would need
or an A.
Let's do
Capital
an
A, because
Let's do a capital
the
A.
bottom one would now all of a sudden be in completely the wrong place.
Yes, so now if we kind of play this, it's not really going to be working. So we would need to make sure our cloner bottom is kind of just was pulled up into the center, and then we can hide this again. And now hopefully it should work. Cool. Yeah, so that's one thing to note. It's not as user friendly as the other setup, but I guess it's minor tweaking, isn't it? Any questions on it?
No questions. You're just explaining everything wonderfully.
I hope so. Okay, so we do have a little bit of time. So I don't know if I was wondering. So these are sort of like basically these are the 3 setups that I wanted to go through. And if there aren't any questions, then I guess I can show this setup of something that
Vertex maps?
We could do vertex maps, or I could show how to create this effect.
I think vertex maps are the next cool thing. We went with them a bit last week, didn't we? But
we did
rush through it.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, I've got like a growth setup, but I might have to rush through it a little bit. Okay, cool. So yeah, because we're on the topic of MoGraph as well, I think I'll create something that involves a vertex map within MoGraph. So yeah, so vertex maps we touched on a little bit of last week, so I'm not going to worry about going into too much detail about them. But I'm going to do a really quick setup. So I might even have the file here that I can show. Oh no, I don't. Okay, never mind. Right, so let's grab some text. God, I'm overusing text today, aren't I?
Texty. It's MoGraph, isn't it? It's just all text.
Pretty much, yeah. Right, so let me just do this really quick setup here. Let's stick with, you know what? Let's stick with the roboto. I quite like that. It's quite like a nice font. And I'm going to just do a little mini bevel here, and my shape depth of 100%. Okay, so that looked a bit funny, didn't it? So I'm just going to rotate this 90 degrees, and I'm going to raise it up 30. So this is something I did in one of the demystifying sessions quite recently. But it's a really cool setup that uses kind of like a vertex map growth, and then you can mix it with MoGraph effectors with fields. But we might have to go through it a little bit quickly because we only have 10 minutes left. So the important thing when we talk about vertex maps is, so basically what a vertex map does is it enters a weight value of 0 to 1 for the points on an object. And so what this means is there's a couple of things we need to do. One, our object that we are kind of adding a vertex map or a vertex weight to needs to be editable. Only downside to vertex maps is it has to be on an editable object. And it also means that when we are looking at our objects, subdivisions are very important. So if I display my shading and lines, at the moment, we can see we don't really have a kind of dense mesh. We don't really have any subdivisions, especially on the cap and on the straight areas of our letters. And so what this means, if we were to create a vertex map growth based on the points of this text as it was, it wouldn't really work very well. And that's because there aren't enough subdivisions, therefore there aren't enough points for our vertex map weight to grow on. And so what we need to do, we have to set up, before we make our text or our object editable, we have to set up enough subdivisions that are going to kind of like help us when it comes to creating our vertex map. So with my text selected, the way that we can set up some subdivisions, so for the sake of this, I'm only going to worry about subdividing this top cap, and then we're going to create a growth along the top of it. So our caps type under our caps menu is set to ngon. If we set this to regular grid, we can see we now have a lot more subdivisions going on. And if we drop this down, we can see we have a quad dominant, which is what we want to go for. We want it to predominantly be made up of quads. And then we also want to readjust this size. So at the moment we have like obviously a more dense mesh than we had originally, but we want to have a bit more because we want our vertex growth to happen potentially more gradually along all of our points. So if I do a value of 6, we can see we have now a much denser mesh. I'm going to leave it as it is for now, but if you wanted to make the whole of your text more dense, we would go to subdivided and intermediate points, and we'd also increase our subdivisions on our depth. But now we're not going to do that. So there are 2 ways to make an object editable. We can click this button down here, which is a make editable, which converts it, as it says, a parametric object into a polygonal object. If you are pre-25, it is up in this corner, I believe. Or we can do our trusty old shortcut, which is the C key. So I'm going to hit the C key. If I drop everything down, we can see we get a whole load of nulls, and then we have our extrude generators for our individual letters. I'm just going to right click this top text because I want it to be one single object, and I'm going to come down and connect object and delete. And what you might notice is there's a whole load of things on here, and these are called polygon selection tags and edge selection tags. And these are going to come in handy. Well, this particular one here is going to come in handy when we introduce MoGraph with it. Cool, right, so now how do we set up our vertex map? So what I'm going to do, so there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can use the paint tool, and you can paint on if you are in points mode, which is the most important thing. You can paint it on. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to select a point, and from this point, this is where my vertex map weight is going to begin. And then we're going to set up a grow, and it's going to grow across all the rest of my points on my text. So what we're going to do, we're going to come in, and we're going to grab this tiny little point here, and this is where we're going to start our vertex map from. And so the way that we can set this up, so with this selected, I'm going to come into select, and then we have this set vertex weight option. And if I do that, it's going to say, okay, what do you want to set the vertex weight to of this particular point? And I want it to be a value of 100%. I want 100% vertex weight, and we're going to see what's going to happen. And hopefully my face doesn't go bright red like it did last time. Cool. So what's happened? A few things have happened. One, our point has gone yellow here, and everything else has gone bright red. And we also have our vertex map up here. And so this is storing our vertex weight. So we have this yellow area, which is a value of 1, and then this red area is a value of 0. And then we have a little gradient in between, but it's not as noticeable. So we did look at kind of this growth setup, I think, was it last week? So we know inside of our vertex map tag, we can go to use fields, and therefore we can come into our fields menu, and then we have this freeze. And in here, it allows us to add our growth. And so I'm pretty sure this is stuff, yeah, that we looked at last week. And so if I press play, we're going to be growing our vertex weight based on this radius. And, you know, if we want it to jump to the next letter, we need to make sure that we have a high enough value. So for me, 24 centimeters is actually going to now jump to the next letter. But because it's happening so quickly, I'm also going to just kind of bring down my effect strength so this all happens a little bit slower. And then maybe we just want to up these frames. Okay, so we've set up our vertex map, we've set up our weight and our weight growth. Now we can combine this with MoGraph. So let's, oh God, I'm very quickly running out of time. So what we're going to do, we are going to clone a bunch of stuff on here. So let's go into we're going to clone up a load of grass on here, which is what I normally do. And then we can go to plants, grass elements and low res. And for the sake of this, I'm just going to grab a couple of different things. I'm just going to grab all the ones that I've previously downloaded. Let's just leave it at that. Cool, so now what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to make these a little bit bigger. And I'm going to use the cloner to clone them on my grow text. So this is when the MoGraph kind of workflow comes into play. So we're going to grab all of our different grass elements. I'm going to drop them into our cloner. And so with our cloner selected, Matt showed us that we could put our mode to object and actually clone on top of an object. And so we want to clone on top of our grass, of our grow text. So I'm just going to drop my text into my object. And now we're getting clones on here. But the thing is, I actually only want these to be cloning along the top of this top face of our text. And this is where our selection tags come into play. So inside of our cloner, we have our object, which is our text, but we also have this selection option, and we can drop in a selection tag and it's only going to clone along that selection. And because I know this second one is the top cap, if we double click it, we can see. I can come into my cloner and I can drop that into here. And now we're only cloning on the top. The only other thing that we'll need to do is the orientation is slightly wrong. So if we rotate -90 on the P, everything is kind of back upright. And now what we can see is we need a whole load more clones to be covering this surface. So let's go like 3,500. And then let's randomize these a little bit more. Cool, right. So now let's use two different effectors to finish this all off. So the first one is the one that Matt showed quite a bit, which was our random effector, and we're going to use it to control some random scale and rotation because everything's looking a little bit too uniform at the moment. So with my cloner selected, we're going to come in and we're going to go to random. I'm going to switch off position because I want it to remain on my top cap, and I'm just going to switch on scale, uniform scale, and then we're going to adjust some rotation. Yep, on here, that looks about right. Cool. So the final thing we want to do is now how do we kind of use our vertex map growth to make it look like this stuff is growing along our text? So the way that we can do that is, first of all, we need to use an effector that's going to be controlling the scale. So we need to scale everything down by 100%. And so we know that our plane effector can be used to basically scale everything down uniformly, a value of -1. And then all we need to do to then control how this and where this effect is happening, we can go into our fields, and then our vertex map that we've just set up, we're going to drag and drop in. And it's kind of having the opposite effect. So all we need to do in our plane where our vertex map is, we can come into here and we can just invert everything. And we can press play. And now what's happening is as our vertex map weight is growing, it is scaling up our kind of clones based on our plane effector. And again,
Awesome.
one thing I love to do is to just finish off with a delay, which, you know, is something we definitely had a look at, and then a little spring, and then let me just, for the sake of this looking nice, put a little ground.
And the other thing you can do, which we definitely don't have time for, which I do quite like, is that you can add the vertex maps into the ground textures as well. So you can have like a different color of grass, like a greener grass, grow over using the vertex map as well. So we've got the ability of having the textures actually change. Vertex maps are incredibly versatile and allow you to use in so many different ways, you know, like say with deformers, with MoGraph, with textures. They're a really useful tool to be working with.
Absolutely, yeah. That is, do you know what, to be fair, that's something we could also kind of add to next week's session, which is kind of all about rendering, but it's also kind of a way of us talking more about like some texturing stuff as well, like we were talking about MoGraph color. Cool, yeah. So quickly for Adonis, if he's still here, just the setup for the hexagon stuff, if it kicks in, is this setup here. So feel free to screenshot or message me kind of separately, and I'll ping you the project file if you like. I was just going to apologise for the fact that we have slightly run over.
A whole minute, we're all right. That's less than normal.
So really quickly, I want to come back to my little presentation. For those of you who are still on, as we were saying, kind of next week, let me find my navigator. Next week, we're going to be looking at all things to do with rendering. And so really quickly, I'm going to just kind of like fire off a poll, and so it's going to come up and be a bit in your face. And it's basically for us to know what kind of renderer are you guys using. So it's multiple choice, so feel free to select any of the ones in there. So we have, if you're currently using Cinema 4D only, which is, you know, the standard or the physical renderers. If you're also using Redshift, let us know. Or any others, you know, some people use Octane, we've got Arnold, V-Ray, Corona, all those kind of ones, because this is important. So for next week, we are happy to do a little bit of an introduction to Redshift as well, if people would want that. But of course, it depends on which of you guys are using Redshift. Like if there's only kind of a couple of you, then maybe I'll just answer questions in the background. But if there is sort of like enough of you and you would like to see it, then either let us know in the chat as well if you want to see this kind of stuff. And we're more than happy. I mean, it's, yeah, so almost like 50% of you are also using Redshift, which is quite cool, because I mean, I'm more than happy to show, because when it comes to rendering, as like me and Matt talked about, it's not so much like practical setups. Like it's a lot more like technical information. And so if in the second hour you guys want to see some Redshift, then I am more than happy to kind of use that hour to go through a bunch of different like Redshift stuff. So let me just, I'm gonna close the poll now, because it's probably been going on enough. But that is super handy to know. Yeah, so I think from the looks of it, maybe we'll do a little bit of Redshift.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Elly, for that. That was really cool. I know that you love doing the MoGraph side of everything, and
yes, I definitely do get carried away. As I mean, we knew we were going to overrun this one, but if you have any more like questions about setups or anything, you know, me and Matt are always available. Training at maxon.net, or drop us a comment on YouTube, both on, you know, Instagram and things like that. So always feel free to ask us any questions. And as always, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much. John was saying, how do you contact me? To be fair, I'm pretty active on Instagram, so feel free to add it with Elly, and you can, you know, message me things on there if you want to, or email. Like I'm not gonna give out my personal email because it goes on YouTube, but hey ho. Cool, yeah, so it's been a pleasure, everyone. Yeah, and Matt, thanks again for your great content as always.
You're welcome, always happy to join, and I'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you all for the final week next week. Enjoy the rest of your weeks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.